good to see everybody here. I will let people in. In a moment, I'm going to put on the share screen. So I did get a question from a couple people that were looking for the recordings of the past lectures. They are all on the website. If you go to synagogue.org, there's a section there with the YouTube recording. Stacy, I see you. Do you want to give any more clarity for where to look? Are they bunched someplace, or all of the YouTube recordings are in the same place? You have to unmute. Sorry, I muted everyone.
Yeah, they're all at one place. You can hear me now?
Yes.
At the bottom of synagogue.org, you'll see a YouTube logo. And if you click that, it'll take you to our YouTube page. And it's, you're right, they're all uploaded.
Okay, thank you. So, and thank you. Stacy's been organizing and putting that on the website. So I'm very grateful for that. So again, you'll find it there if you look on the website. At the bottom of the homepage, the YouTube link, and then it will give all the different recordings that we have there. So you should be able to find it there. Okay, so this evening's topic is the Jewish minority in Islam, because next week we're doing the Jewish minority in medieval Christendom, and most of the story that we're talking about is anti-Semitism in the West, which is asking the questions about the relationship of Judaism and Christianity. Granted, the first two chapters that we discussed, which was anti-Judaism in the biblical period, and then anti-Judaism in the Greek and Roman period before the rise of Christianity, was addressing that question: what did anti-Judaism look like before the birth of Christianity? The last two evenings that we had were focusing on the rise of anti-Judaism in Christianity. We spent one evening on Christian Bible New Testament texts, and then last week we were looking at some key sections of anti-Judaism in the Church Fathers. We're going to return next week to the Christian story, but we're going to take a little 1 week detour from that to talk about anti-Judaism in the Quran, in the traditions about Muhammad, and the and medieval and the Jews in the period of the medieval of Islam in the medieval period. So I'm just pausing to let people in as they join. So the question about that, and the question is, why are we focusing more on Christianity, and how does Judaism and the Islamic world come into that story? The general sort of prejudicial impression of most
video.
I'm sorry?
Did you turn off the video?
Who doesn't see a video? I see everybody here.
David doesn't see his video.
David, I see you. It says iPhone David. You'll have to turn on. I don't know what. I think everyone else can see. I have everyone on my screen here. And I didn't put on the share screen yet. So you'll either, you know what, David, because your video is closed, because I don't see your face. So I think you're just seeing a blank screen. That's what we see of you. Once I put on the share screen, you'll probably be able to see it. If not, just send me a chat or scream out and we'll figure it out. The basic understanding, like a bird's eye view, comparing that the impression that most have that look at the sweep of history of Jews in the medieval period in the Christian world versus Jews in the medieval period in the Muslim world, is that the Jews in the Muslim world did better than the Jews in the Christian world. And historians love to point that out today, because they say that today there's the sort of the Jewish Arab struggle over in the Arab-Israeli wars, and that so much of anti-Semitism today in the world and on the college campus is intertwined with anti-Israel discourse. That we have to realize that most of the story of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism is really in a Jewish Christian context, not a Jewish Muslim conquest. And when we look at the history, we see actually that the long history of laws and prejudice against Jews in the Christian world, you don't have similar stories in Jews in the Muslim world. We don't have stories of mass expulsions. There are some expulsions, and we'll talk about that, but not to the extent that you have Jews expelled from this country and from England, from France, from Spain, the way that we have Christian story. We don't have the same stories in the Islamic medieval history of an inquisition, of forced conversion of Jews, of questioning of genuine conversion to Islam, the way that we have in the Inquisition. We are going to spend a whole session on the story of the Jews in Spain. So in general, the sense was Jews had more rights and had a better life in the Muslim world than the Christian world. Part of that impression is the aftermath of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, that most of the Jews who are forced to leave Spain go to the Ottoman Empire, which is why you have large Sephardic communities in Turkey and Greece and Egypt, because the Sultan had allowed the Jews, gave permission for the Jews from Spain to enter the borders of the Ottoman Empire. So there's a sense that the Ottomans gave protection to the Jews where the Catholic monarchy in Spain did not. And in modern European history in the 19th century, sort of this mystique of, oh, the Jews were accepted in medieval Islam the way that they were never accepted in European Christendom. And we should learn from that and from that alternative history. There's also this mystique of the Jews in the golden age of Arab Spain before Spain was reconquered by the Christians. And that was a sense of Jews who were accepted, who lived accepted in a way that they weren't in Christian kingdoms where the Jews were always at a lower status. Other scholars point out that the reality is more complicated than that there were expulsions of Jews from certain parts of the Muslim world. The biography of, some years ago, we did a whole year on the history of Jews in the Arab world and of Judaism and Islam. And we saw that the biography of Maimonides kind of tells that story, that why does Maimonides begin his life in Cordoba in Muslim Spain, and he ends up in Egypt? It's because they had to leave because there was persecution against the Jews in Spain, and then they went to North Africa, and then it wasn't safe for Jews in North Africa, so then they had to move again. And all that time on the ship gave Maimonides time to write his commentaries, and actually wrote the commentary in the Mishnah, which is his first book, because they were most of it on the ship while they were going eastward through the Mediterranean, which is a fascinating image. So the point is, there was discrimination, there were persecutions, there was a status differentiation that Jews and Christians in Muslim countries were called dhimmis, D-H-I-M-M-I in English, which was a secondary status under Muslim citizens. They were considered people of the book as monotheists, so they were tolerated, whereas idolaters were not tolerated in the Muslim world. They had to pay a special tax, the jizya tax, as a dhimmi in order to preserve their status, but were otherwise tolerated. Part of the sense that Jews did better under the Arabs and the Christians were that when we hear about Christian-Arab conflict, and our sources for that are usually the European Christian sources, the Jews are presented as being on the side of the Arabs against the Christians. We know this in the account of the First Crusades, when the Crusader forces attacked Jerusalem, that the Jews and the Arabs tried to fight off the invading crusading army. And the Crusaders then treated the Jews in Jerusalem with the same violence with which they treated the Arabs living in Jerusalem. Does dhimmi mean protected, Jerry? I think so. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's the protective caste that it refers to. to Jews and Christians. They're protected as long as they accepted the suzerainty of Islam, which is the basic rule within the Muslim world. So overall, what I've been saying, and these are overarching marks, I want to look at some texts after this, is that there is a general sense, there is no image yet correct because I haven't yet put anything on the screen. So Joe, so again, if you put your setting to gallery, then you'll see everyone. But if you're watching, if you're doing this on if you're doing the Zoom on your phone, then you're probably going to see a black screen because I think the default is your screen unless you open your video, which I don't see where you are there. Okay, so the overall sense is that while Jews were still a minority, right, and there wasn't the sense of a multicultural open society in the medieval world the way that we would like there to be or can imagine it in our world today. There's the general sense that Jews did better in the Muslim world than the Christian world. As I said, there is the evidence of the Crusades. There was also when the reconquistadors reconquered Spain, the Jews were, some Jews were understood to be working with the Arabs, and then and were seen as supporting the Arab defenders. Again, it's not surprising that from the Christian sources that they would see the Jews and see them along with the Arabs, because those are the others were not accepted. But as I said, the situation is more complicated. There is persecution and prejudice and discrimination against Jews in the Muslim world. And flip side of that, in the Christian world, yes, and this is what we were saying last week, we're talking about the theological importance of the Jews, the economic importance of the Jews in a medieval Christian perspective. Jews are the persecuted minority in Christian Europe. There's not a Muslim minority in Christian Europe. There's not any other minority. The Jews are the other, so the Jews get the brunt of prejudice because there is no other. No one else was tolerated, right? The Jews were generally tolerated until they weren't, until they were expelled. And that's the story that we'll get to, and worse than expelled in the 20th century, of course. And that's the story that what we'll get to as we'll move on. So with those ambiguities, right, the general sense, and it's more complicated, looking at the sweep of the medieval history, it raises the question of, although historians love to point out, oh, you think the real anti-Judaism comes from the Muslims, but really it comes from the Christians. And I don't know whether it's who's worse vis-a-vis the Jews. It should not have to be a contest that way. There is also the challenge of patient, right? In that, why is there such a vehement anti-Semitism that is seen today in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, and how do we understand that? And is that simply is that a side of response to Israel as an anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism, or is it goes back deeper and should be explained through the arc of the history of anti-Semitism? So this rather large book by the Hebrew University historian Robert Wistrich, called A Lethal Obsession. The subtitle is Anti-Semitism from Antiquity to the Global Jihad. And Wistrich's thesis is that there is a clear arc, that there is virulent anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, and that while it is directed against Israel, it is not only directed against Israel, it is also directed against Jews. And he spends, goes to length to describe what are the differences between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And they're kind of like a Venn diagram, because there is some anti-Israel discourse that's not anti-Semitic, and there is anti-Semitic discourse that's not anti-Zionist, but there's a lot that fall in the middle. But he also is supposedly writing a history of anti-Semitism, but only about the first, in the first chapter, he talks about first couple chapters is anti-Semitism in Europe. And then the rest of the book, the majority of the book, deals with the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism from the Arab world. his point is that one flows from the other, and that the anti-Semitism that is directed against Jews from the Arab world is a direct line, is not just a contemporary phenomenon of negative reaction to Israel, but rather falls under the same broader story that we're trying to get a handle on in these series of lectures that I'm doing. And he even shows that there's sort of almost a passing of the baton from the Nazis to the Arabs. So you get three stages in anti-Semitism. There's the Christian anti-Semitism, the blood libel and the persecutions and expulsions. And then you have the Nazi stage, which is sort of moves beyond the religious anti-Semitism, because the Nazis are not religious, but they take a lot of those themes and they secularize it. And then the third stage is the Arab anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But the stages all flow from one into the other. And one passage I want to share here, he says that and he's not talking about all Arabs and all Muslim leaders, but he's just saying that it's from within the Muslim world that there is tremendous hatred against Jews and is directed against Judaism and Jews, not just to Israel. And it's, if you want to get really depressed, you can try reading this book, because the evidence is overwhelming. And what's most depressing about it is the book is 10 years old. So if you had to add another 10 years worth, it would be that much longer to read. But his passage he writes is that contemporary Muslim fundamentalists see a direct line of continuity between treacherous Jewish conduct toward the messenger of Allah, which is Muhammad, of course, and the present day struggle over Palestine. Now, as then, the goal of the Jews is assumed to be the destruction of Islam, meaning that he sees a direct line to the history of anti-Semitism, but he's saying something more than that. He's saying that Arab anti-Semitism and Muslim anti-Semitism, and I add Muslim and not just Arab, because a lot of the evidence that he's pointing to is discourse coming out of Iran. Of course, the Iranians are not Arabs. Is not just an heir to the European Christian anti-Jewish tradition, but it also goes back to an authentic Muslim tradition of understanding the danger of the Jews from the Muslim perspective. So that's kind of what I want to look at here, is there a root for this that is a direct line of Muslim sources and that's not fueling them on its own, but it's the combination of that history that was there at the beginning, and then adding into that the heritage of anti-Jewish discourse and anti-Semitism from Christian Europe, and added into that the reaction, the negative reaction against Jews driven by Israel, which is understandable just from the sense, as I said, that in the medieval world, that Jews were accepted in the Muslim world if they accepted the authority of Islam. So again, Jews could live in Palestine, but when a Jewish state is established with sovereignty over part of the land that was considered a part of the original Muslim Ummah, right, the world of Islam, then that is something that's going to trigger a reaction against Judaism. But it's these things combined, and that's the point. And that's what Wistrich is saying, that it's not just a reaction to Israel and to Zionism, that there was this strain that was there all along. So we're going to look at some of that stuff. We're going to start with the Quran, which is the Muslim scripture, and I'm going to start now with the share screen for today's. So let me get that here, and hold on one second. Let's press the slideshow. Do it from the beginning. Okay, now if anyone does not see this, hopefully everyone should see the slideshow now on your screens, because I put the share screen on. If you don't, I don't know if I have a solution, but you can let me know. Okay, thank you. Good. And let me let in someone else. Now, this here is a passage from the Quran on the Jews. There were a lot of different passages you could cite. This is from the Quran's divided into surahs. The surah is a group, as a revelation, like a chapter. And this is from the second surah, verse 93, basically. It says, and remember, I took your covenant and I raised above you the towering height of Mount Sinai, saying, hold firmly to what I have given you and hearken to the law. They said, we hear and we disobey. And they had to drink in their hearts of the taint of the calf because of their faithlessness. So what this is here is the Quran, and the Quran is presented as the revelation of God to the prophet of Muhammad. That's why it's called the prophet. And this is a place here where it is directly referring to the foundational element in Judaism, which is the revelation of the Torah at Sinai. And the Quran here is directly talking about that Sinai, because the revelation of the Torah at Sinai is very important from a theological perspective for Christians and Muslims, right? Because both Christianity and Islam is drawing as a development out of the Torah, right, and out of Judaism, but both claim that that covenant is superseded. The Christians claim it's superseded through the salvation of Jesus, and Jesus's gospel is the New Testament, the New Covenant, which supersedes the Old Covenant, which is the covenant of the law on Sinai. We talked a little bit about that last week. We'll talk about it more when we go back to the Christian story. From the Muslim perspective, it's that Muhammad presents a new prophecy, and one of the significant differences between the Muslim theological strategies versus the Christian strategies is that the Muslim sources, and especially here in the Quran itself, it gives us a quotation from the Torah, and it's only slightly different, but very significantly different. So it's not just a difference of interpretation, but there's actually a contention over the text. The Christians didn't argue about the text itself with the Jews. The Christians understood that what they had was a translation, and they respected that the Jews were the custodians of the original Hebrew, which is why, according to Augustine, it was so important to tolerate the Jews, because they were the witnesses to the text of the original covenant. And rather than argue over the text, we'll take the Jews at their word, that's what the text says, but then we'll explain how they don't understand what it means. The Muslim strategy was that the Jews messed up their own text, and that this is the real revelation. Like people often say, it's a famous story how famous difference of Jewish and Muslim interpretation is the binding of Isaac, right? For the Muslims, it's the same story, except that it's Ishmael who's bound on the not Isaac, because Ishmael is the son who inherits the covenant, not Isaac, right? Because Ishmael's the father of the Arabs, Isaac's the father of the Jews. So he will say, well, how can a Muslim believe that it was Ishmael who was Abraham's favorite son, when the Torah clearly says it's Isaac? Well, so the answer of Islam is that no, the Torah actually said Ishmael. It's just the Jews corrupted it because they either intentionally or unintentionally, it's not the original text. We know the text says something else because that's what God revealed to Muhammad. This section here is not about the binding of Isaac, it's about Sinai. This is the most critical story of the Torah because it establishes the binding covenant between God and Israel. And whereas Christians say it is superseded, the Muslim understanding is, well, how does God give an eternal covenant and then supersede it? Say, well, no, I'm going to abrogate it when God promises not to abrogate it. So instead, this is how they understand the story. God wanted to make a covenant with Israel and raised Mount Sinai above them and said, hold firmly to what I have given to you, obey the law. But they said, we hear and we disobey. We hear what you're saying, God, but we're not going to follow it. And the proof of this is that what they immediately did after the revelation of Sinai is they made a golden calf, which is in direct violation of the Torah, the 10 Commandments, don't make a graven image. And from a Muslim perspective, it's important that they would focus on the calf as proof of the infidelity of Israel, because it's idolatrous. And if there's one thing that Islam is about, it's about being anti-idolatrous. Of the three Abrahamic religions, we would say the Muslims are the most anti-idolatry, right? Where you don't have any images in traditional Islamic art. They won't even draw an image of a human figure because we are created in the image of God. So that strict adherence to unapologetic monotheism is a hallmark of Islam. And in fact, to be Muslim means to be a believer in the one God. There's a classic statement elsewhere that Abraham was a Muslim. Well, of course, if Abraham believed in one God, Abraham was a Muslim. So they say we will disobey, which they then do by making the golden calf. And that's why their punishment was they had to drink the taint of the calf. That when Moses forces those who participate in the golden calf, he melts down the metal of the calf and then makes the transgressors drink it as their punishment. And of course, they die by their drinking it, pointing out the execution of the calf ringleaders. In a sense, the Quran is saying that, could read it as saying that punishment should really fall upon all the Jews, because the Jews as a people, as a religious people, did not follow the covenant. In the very beginning, they said, we will hear and we disobey. Okay, this is the passage from the Quran here. Now I want to show you the Jewish background to it. And we're going to look here at, let me just get the next slide up. Okay. Now these are Jewish sources. On the left-hand column is 2 passages from the Torah from the book of Exodus. And the right-hand comment is a Talmudic passage. So, and these are important to understand the background behind that passage in the Quran. First from Exodus 19. This is from Parshat Yitro. It's the chapter right before the 10 Commandments. It says, Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. And the Hebrew is very important there. The foot of the mountain is betachtit hahar. This is what it says. And tachat means under. So that's going to be important in the Midrash. And actually, let's look at the Midrash now on the right before we go to the second passage from the Torah. The Midrash, which is preserved in the Talmud in 2 places, Shabbat 88a and Avodah Zarah 2b, it says they stood beneath the mount, right? Because that's the quotation. And then how is that understood? This is the Midrash is the homiletic commentary on that verse. Rabbi Abdimi ben Chama ben Chas said, this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, overturned the mountain upon them like an inverted cast. This is a very famous Midrash here, right? It says that because it says betachtit har, that the people were underneath the mountain. The translation at the left is at the foot of the mountain, because that's the shot, right? Contextually, that's what it has to mean. But the Rabbi Abdimi is reading it closely. He says, aha. It doesn't say at the foot. It actually says under the mountain. So what that means is that God picked up the mountain, turned it upside down, holds the mountain over the people, and says, if you take upon yourselves the law, good. If not, here will be your grave. Right? So it's a famous midrash there, and it explains why the people immediately say, okay, we'll do it. We'll do whatever you say. And this is why Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov observed, really he objected, and he said, this furnishes a strong protest against the law. Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov is saying to Rabbi Abdimi Bar Chama, saying that's not a very good midrash. It may be a clever midrash, but it doesn't make Israel look good, because you're saying that God forced them to accept the Torah. It says, accept the Torah or I'll drop this mountain on you. So the fact that the Talmud gives 2 views there. One is that the people agree because of fear of God. Rabbi Acha says, no, the people didn't accept it out of fear. They accepted it willingly. But according to both views, right, it's the important point that it's the people stood under the mountain, and that's the Midrash. And going back to the Quran, That's why when it says, I raised above you the towering height of Mount Sinai, shows us that the Quran knew not only this passage from Exodus 19, but was also aware of the Midrash. There are many, many examples that show that either in the Quran or the other Islamic traditions that Muhammad and the early Muslim teachers were very knowledgeable about what was said in the Torah and the rabbinic readings of the Torah. And this is clear. This is right in the Quran itself, a clear reference to a Midrash that's preserved in the Talmud. And now the other passage, if I go back here a second, the quotation is, hold firmly to what I have given you and hearken to the law. Now, I could have given you a quotation from Exodus 19. I wanted to do this one from Exodus 24. It says, then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do. Na'aseh v'nishma. So now you can see the very slight difference, but not insignificant, between our version of the Torah and how the Quran quotes the Torah, because the Quran says, they said, we hear and we disobey, whereas the Torah says, we hear and we obey. There's just a no. So Muhammad said, no, actually, you said, na'aseh v'lo nishma, right? We will do, but we're not going to do. Lo na'aseh v'nishma. And in fact, it says, we will do. We will listen and we will do. You know how sometimes when we're checking, or editing a text, we wrote something, we forgot to insert a not. And when you forget the not, it gives you the meaning that's the exact opposite of what you intended. Sometimes they find that in different versions of rabbinic texts, even where the question is, what did this rabbi said? Oh, maybe he said not, which would be the opposite of what he otherwise said. And you get all kinds of complicated passages in the Talmud about that. I wanted to focus on the na'aseh v'nishma, means we'll do and we will hear. This is also that quotation from Exodus 24:7 is very, very important in rabbinic theology. So the point of that is that people say we will do and we will hear in that order, and that's a counterintuitive order, because usually let me listen to it, let me understand it, and then I'll do it. But by saying we will do and we'll hear rather than we will hear and we'll do, the rabbinic tradition points out that that means that the people accepted fidelity to the covenant before they even understood what it was, because that's how much faith that they had, right? That they said, we'll do it, whether it's because God was scaring them or whether it was out of their genuine willingness. And that's the debate between Rabbi Avdimi and Rabbi Acha. But either way, they say we will do, and then we will study and we will learn and understand it. But that our fidelity is not based upon our understanding of the individual laws, that our fidelity is based upon our acceptance of the covenant as a whole. And that's the basic element, the foundation of Judaism's understanding of the covenant between God and Israel. And that is exactly what's being challenged here in this passage in the Quran. It's saying, no, you didn't say we will unreservedly fulfill the covenant. You said the opposite. You say we hear you and we disobey, right? They also switched. You see, the Quran switches the order. The Quran says nishma v'lo na'aseh. We hear you, but we will not do it. In the Torah, it says we will do it. We'll do it, and we hear you. So it said you said, I want to listen to it first, but I'm not going to do it, which is the opposite of unconditional acceptance of the covenant, which is the way it's presented in the Torah and understood that way by the rabbi. So what we have, there's a contention here, contentiousness, that the foundational source of Islam, the Quran, is saying, I disagree fundamentally with the sense that God made a covenant with the Jewish people. You don't have that anywhere in Christianity. This is a much stronger source because it's a denial, in a sense, of the covenant that God made with Israel, saying it was never based on fidelity. Let's move on to another passage now. Move forward a couple hundred years. We're covering a lot of ground today. Ibn Ishaq is a Muslim scholar who was born in Iran and then ended up living in Egypt. And he collected a series of traditions about the biography of the story of the life of Muhammad. And this is and he's living in the mid-8th century. This is 150 years, I said 200, 150 years after the life of Muhammad. And he's collecting these stories, what we would call midrashic agadah, right? Narrative traditions that are not written in the Quran. And one of it here is a conversation between two Jews. And it says, one Jew asks another who has just visited Muhammad, is he, that is he, Muhammad, the prophet announced in the Torah? Do you recognize him? And can you be sure? And the other Jew says, yes. And the first Jew asks, what do you feel about him? The second Jew says, by God, I shall be his enemy as long as I live. So what this tradition here, that's part of the Muslim tradition, what it codifies, what it presents to us is that the Jews understand that Muhammad is a true prophet, and yet they still deny him and see him as an enemy. This parallels much of the anti-Jewish discourse we see in the church fathers and the later in later medieval Christian traditions that we're going to look at over the next 2 sessions or so. Because the Christians say the Jews are, it actually goes more than that, because the standard Christian view is that the Jews are blind. They don't understand the prophecies. It's right there in the Torah about about Jesus, and they don't understand it because they're blind. They don't have to read the text. Here it's even worse in a sense, right? This tradition is saying that they do understand that it refers to Muhammad, that he's the true prophet, and yet they still don't accept him. And that's sometimes the Christian anti-Jewish discourse gets to that point, that the Jews are then condemned because because of their stubbornness and refusal to accept Jesus. And here it's from the beginning of this is someone who met Muhammad, says, oh yeah, I know he's God's prophet, but I'm not going to accept him. And it sets the Jew up here, right, in this text as, if the Jew sees us as the enemy, clearly the Jew is wrong because they don't understand, they don't recognize God's prophet. They're on the wrong side of theology, if not the wrong side of history, and are, by definition, the oppositional in a symbolic level. And that always translates into real tension as well. Now, the same writer, Ibn Ishaq, here he tells a story about the poisoning of Muhammad. Now, this story does not appear in the Quran. Again, it's only finds its way into a text about 150 years after the life of Muhammad. But it's important for us to be aware of this. It is something that Robert Wistrich, in his large tome, he points to that, saying that the idea of Jews that are set to destroy Islam, that understanding of Judaism in certain corners of fundamentalist Islam Muslim world today draw on these traditions that go back to this one, to the 8th century. And it's not all quotations, some of it is summarized by David Nirenberg. So I'm reading you from his summary, the quotations he's translating directly, the rest he's summarizing. A captured Jewess of Khaybar, which was the place, there was a war of Khaybar that Muhammad fights against one of the Jewish tribes in Arabia, poisoned a roast lamb she prepared for Muhammad. One of his, it should be his. Okay. One of his companions ate greedily and died of the meal. Muhammad himself took hold of the shoulder and chewed a morsel of it, but he did not swallow it. His prophetic prudence saved his life, though the poison began the illness that would eventually kill him. It is because of the Jewish poison he ate on the victory field of Khaybar that the Muslims consider that the apostle died as a martyr, in addition to the prophetic office with which God honored him. So we have a tradition here in that one of the Jewish women from the tribe that Muhammad triumphed over. And by the way, you may notice that I chose not to focus in tonight's class on the Jewish tribes in Arabia that struggled against Muhammad, that allied with the Quraysh, which was the tribe, Muhammad's tribe, because I really want to focus not on, what Jews were in Arabia and what happened there, but more on the symbol of the Jew as the other, the non-believer in the greater scope of Muslim anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, which I'm really looking about not what the Quran says about the Jews in Arabia, but what the Quran says about Judaism and about Jews in general. And here, because this tradition comes 150 years after Muhammad, it is not an historical text about a source of Muhammad's life, but it is a text, a proof text about how in the 8th century and as Islam was spreading through the world, how they understood the Jews. And the understanding is that the Jews tried to poison Muhammad. Now, just to put it there, blaming the Jews for the death of Muhammad is like blaming the Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus, for the death of Jesus, right? It sees the Jews as not only the ones who don't believe properly, and just like the Christians, from the Muslim and the Christian perspective, the Jews are sometimes more objectionable than pagans, than idolaters, because the Jews are so close. They're already monotheists. They should be able to understand, and yet they don't. And not only that, they killed God on earth. Now, with the Christian story, Jesus is God incarnate. The Muslims don't accept that, right? But they still here, it's a tradition blaming the Jews, or a Jew, but this Jewess is a symbol for the Jews as a whole for killing Muhammad, except that they don't actually kill him, but they do, right? Someone dies immediately, so that's the first thing. And then they know it's poison. So Muhammad doesn't eat enough of it, but he already chewed a little bit of it. He spit it out. So he doesn't die right away, but it eventually kills him. And then it is because of the Jewish poison he ate on the victory field of Khaybar that the Muslims consider the apostle died as a martyr, in addition to the prophetic office which God honored him. The point there is that it's important for Islamic tradition that Muhammad be a martyr, because to die as a martyr is the highest, most sacred form of death. And that the Christians have that because Jesus is the ultimate martyr. He dies on the cross. And Muhammad, doesn't die as a martyr. So it's understandable that 150 years later, Islamic tradition would find a way to say, oh no, actually Muhammad was a martyr, because then that makes him that much more holy. But he wasn't a martyr. So, well, he was a martyr, but he only died later because the poison caused an illness that took time. Yes, he's also a holy person because God gave him prophecy. But in addition to that, he was martyred by this Jewish woman. There are so many levels of this in understanding how martyrdom is understood, how Muhammad is raised up. You had a similar. You go forward. This is the 8th century. So if you go forward 300 years in the time of the Crusades, there's a Jewish legend about Isaac, with the binding of Isaac, that Isaac actually is killed by Abraham and then is resurrected 3 days later. And it's important for Jews to tell that story because the Christians see the binding of Isaac as typological for Jesus, right? And as signifying the crucifixion of Jesus, and say, well, Jesus actually is martyred and Isaac is almost martyred, but not really. So, okay, maybe Isaac was martyred. So here, maybe Muhammad was martyred, but more. So put that out, just to put that in the sort of the history of the literature and how they later times will assert martyrdom on an historical theological character that it's not in the original biography. And that's why I think this is important, but it also goes deeper here because it establishes a guilt upon the Jews for the death of the founder, and it establishes that for Islam in the same way that Christianity has it, with the claim of Jews being responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. So we see here an authentic Muslim source that asserts that. It's not something that's just handed on from Christianity, although of course Ibn Ishaq knows what Christians say about Jews, right? So they're not the two worlds aren't in isolation from them. Now, I'm moving forward another 250 years because we're just taking selections here. And this is by another Muslim author, Ibn Hazm, who's living in Cordoba, in Spain. So now we're in Spain, and this is the period when it's still, the Cordoba is still in the south of Spain, it's still under Muslim rule by an Umayyad Caliph. And in this period, at the beginning of 11th century, it's Caliph Abd al-Rahman V, who had a Jewish prime minister, Shmuel Hanagid. And Ibn Hazm is a Muslim who is very upset with the Caliph for hiring a Jewish prime minister. So again, we have to understand always the context that we read this source. It's filled with hatred of Jews, but it's also testifying to the fact that a Jew rose to the rank of prime minister. So does that mean that there was anti-Semitism or there was not? Well, there's both, because anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, and again, we'll keep coming back to whether anti-Semitism is the appropriate word, is never in a vacuum. It's always the relation to something else. It's always in conversation with something else, saying, I don't like the role that Jews play, so then Jews are playing a role. Sometimes it's in a real world. Sometimes, as we've said other places, it's just in an imaginary sense of the symbolic oppositions. In this case, there is a real Jew who has a position of real power. And then this is a Muslim written as a letter to the Caliph complaining about that. And let me read it here. It is my hope that, sorry, one second. That is the last slide. It is my hope that God will treat those who befriend the Jews and take them into their confidence as he treated the Jews themselves. For whosoever amongst Muslim princes has listened to all this and still continues to befriend Jews, well deserves to be overtaken by the same humiliation and to suffer in this world the same griefs. So the idea is that God will treat those who befriend the Jews as God treated themselves, meaning you're going to face the wrath of God, because you shouldn't befriend the Jews. And a prince should not, and if a prince listens to us and you're listening to me, Caliph, and you're still befriending the Jews, then you deserve to be overtaken by the same humiliation and to suffer in this world the same griefs which God has meted out to the Jews. And here we have, go back to what I read last week from the church father Eusebius. Eusebius argued that the suffering of the Jews from the destruction of Jerusalem when Titus conquers, breaks the siege in the year 70, and the consequent destruction of the temple is a theological proof of the error of Judaism from Eusebius's perspective, from failing to accept Jesus. Here we have this Muslim writer from the early 11th century, Ibn Hazm, who's saying the same thing in a Muslim context, that if you, the Jews have suffered, and if you befriend them, you will experience the same suffering. The suffering the Jews have experienced in history is meted out by God. Apart from their chastisement in the next world, the Jews will be punished by God in the next world as well, not only in this world. Whosoever, and by the way, that is also informed or parallels rabbinic theology. That in rabbinic theology, the idea of the olam haba, the world to come, is the way the rabbis answered the challenge that why is it that good things happen to bad people, as opposed to, and also bad things happen to good people, right? How come people that are good seem to suffer, and how come bad people seem to really live it up? And the answer is, well, God gives punishments and rewards in this world, but whatever God didn't have a chance to do, it'll be made up in the world to come. Because the more that the bad person prospered in this world, the more that person's going to suffer in the world to come. And vice versa, the more the good person suffered in this world, the more that good person will be rewarded in the world to come. The same theological idea is here, saying also in the next world. Because here you have Shmuel Anagid. You have this Jew who's the prime minister who's living it up. Ibn Chazim says, don't worry. If he doesn't get what's waiting for him in his life now, he'll certainly get in the next life. Okay. Whosoever acts in this manner will be, recompensed by the suffering along with the Jews themselves. Let any prince upon whom God has bestowed some of his bounty take heed. Let him get away from this. And here we get the hatred here, from this filthy, stinking, dirty crew beset with God's anger and malediction, with the humiliation and wretchedness, misfortune, filth, and dirt, as no other people has ever been. Let him know that the garments in which God has enwrapped them are more obnoxious than war and more contagious than elephantiasis. May God keep us from rebelling against him in his decision, from honoring those whom he has humiliated, by raising up those whom he has cast down. Okay, I'm going to turn off the share there. We have about 5 minutes left. I do want to read you though one section here, and this is raises the big overall questions that we're looking at. Right? You can always go back in Muslim sources, in Christian sources, in ancient Greek and Roman sources, and find passages that are anti-Jewish. You could look in the Rome. You're looking in Tacitus, when we did Jews in the Rome period. I didn't have a chance to put that up on the board. But Tacitus, in his history of the histories, he has passages that are very, very anti-Jewish. But just because we find anti-Jewish passages in classical literature, in Christian patristic literature, the church fathers of classical Muslim literature, does that necessarily mean that they're anti-Semitic? And does it necessarily mean that the pagan world, that Christianity, that Islam is anti-Semitic? Now, Robert Wistrich, he argues that yes, you have these evidence, a basic element of the worlds in which the Jews lived. He calls it a lethal obsession. It was an obsession against Judaism. And we can talk more when we get to the modern period, because that's his focus on why that is. I want to read you one passage from David Nuremberg's book, Anti-Judaism, which has a more nuanced understanding of it. He says, it would be misleading to understand Islam's critical use of Jews and Judaism as a borrowing from Christianity or from the many forms of Judaism, rabbinic, Samaritan, Judeo-Christian, etc., that we find traces of in early Islamic prophecy and tradition. Meaning we shouldn't just say that these Muslim texts, like the ones that we looked at tonight, are just borrowed from Christianity or even borrowed from rabbinic, because you could find a rabbinic text, a Samaritan text, a Judeo-Christian text that are anti-Jewish about the other Jews that they're criticizing. So it's more than a borrowing. It was the product of arguments about how to read prophetic texts, arguments common to all who wanted to understand themselves as the true Israel, as who is the true Israel, in a world full of competing claims to truth. To point out the importance of this reading practice in early Islam is not to say that Islam is essentially anti-Semitic any more than it is to say that Christianity or rabbinic Judaism, for that matter, is essentially anti-Semitic. It is only to say that Islam, like Christianity and many another true Israel, contains within itself the potential to understand the adversity it encounters in terms of Judaism. So that means is that the argument that he's saying is that the communities of faith that are working with this common text of the Hebrew Bible are going to read it in a way that understands themselves as the true heir. And in order to understand themselves as the true heir, there must be an other who misunderstands it as the false heir. And because the Jews came first, they're the obvious, they're in the crosshairs there, right? To use the interesting analogy, because it's to say that they're reading it wrong. One other great line from Nuremberg, just to say, talks about how it's all about interpretation of text. He writes, interpretation, the human desire to make sense of communication, is the wellspring of discord. And I read that, I had to reread it and think about that over and over again. That is a very, very scary statement. Interpretation, the human desire to make sense of communication, is the wellspring of discord. He's saying that the more we focus on interpreting and communicating, the more we will disagree. Now, that's a very scary truth, right? Because we want to believe that the more we communicate, the more we engage in dialogue, the more we understand where each other is coming, and the more that we build bridges. All of the approaches to combating anti-Semitism, to teaching about the Holocaust, all based upon knowledge about and about dialogue, right? To have interfaith dialogue between the different religions will form bridges. And that's all true. That's all true. But there's also a flip side, that if you're in dialogue, then there's going to be, you set something up as the opposition, and you're setting something up as the opposition that sets the roots of conflict. There is a tremendous anti-Jewish tradition in Christian literature, and also, as I showed you, some few examples today in Islamic tradition. There's not a really large anti-Jewish tradition in Buddhist literature, or in Shinto literature, right? Or in Confucian literature. It's because the Jews were not the other there. They have oppositions to other groups, but not to the Jews. But it's because the Jews are living in opposition, both symbolically and historically, with Christians and with Muslims, is why the traditions develop in such oppositional levels, and why it is anti-Semitism and why the Jews are the victims. It's because the other part of the title of today's talk, the Jewish minority in Islam, and then next week is the Jewish minority in Christianity. In both cases, the Jews were the minority, right? And being the minority puts one, of course, at a disadvantage. So we're going to return to the questions of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, and how the heritage of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, what role that plays in the contemporary world. But tonight's talk was really to focus more the sources there. Thank you very much. It's great to have. We do have class again next week, remember, and then we have a few times off. Are there any questions or any thoughts before I close the session? I see Laura, you're raising your hand there? No, okay. Well, thank you again. I'm going to stop talking because my have a good night, and I will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
All
Good
right.
night.
Lila
Thank you, Rabbi.
So, thank you.